Elena Vance did not measure time in hours. She measured it in equity. At 7 p.m. on a Friday, a single minute of her attention was valued at roughly $450 based on the current pre-IPO valuation of Aura Bio. By that metric, the man sitting across from her at Le Bernardin had already cost her nearly $15,000, and the appetizers hadn't even arrived yet. She stared at the rim of her wine glass, her thumb ghosting over the screen of her phone, which lay face down on the white tablecloth. It buzzed against the wood, a phantom heartbeat she was desperate to answer. A regulatory approval from the FDA was pending. The Tokyo market was opening in 3 hours. And yet, here she was, trapped in the amber glow of a Michelin-starred restaurant, engaged in a social experiment she was rapidly categorizing as a critical failure. The lighting in here is specific, the man said. Elena looked up. Mark, that was his name. He was 42, according to the profile the elite matchmaking service had promised was a 98% compatibility match. The algorithm was clearly broken. Mark did not look like a 98% match for a woman who had been featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, The Bionic Woman of Biotech. He looked like the before picture in a stress management brochure. He wore a button-down shirt that was clean but unbranded, and a blazer that looked like it had been bought off the rack at a department store, comfortable, durable, and utterly without silhouette. It's ambient, Elena corrected, her voice tight. It's designed to minimize distraction. It's designed to hide the exits, Mark noted, his eyes briefly flicking toward the kitchen doors and the main entrance before settling back on her. But sure, ambient. Elena paused, a flicker of irritation rising in her chest. You seem uneasy. Is the venue too much? Mark smiled. It was a slow, easy expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. His eyes were gray, flat, and still. They were the only thing about him that unsettled her. They didn't dart around like the eyes of the venture capitalists she usually dined with. They just sat there, absorbing information. The venue is fine, Elena, he said, picking up his water glass. I'm just observant by habit, so tell me. Your profile said you enjoy high-velocity problem-solving. Does that mean you like puzzles or you just like stress? Elena straightened her spine, the silk of her blouse shifting. I run a company that engineers synthetic platelets for trauma patients. I don't solve puzzles, Mark. I solve death. When I'm not here, I'm managing 300 employees, navigating federal regulations, and preparing for an IPO that will likely change the landscape of hematology. Stress is fuel, she waited for him to be impressed. Usually, this was the part where men became insecure, overcompensated by talking about their portfolios, or simply withered. Mark just nodded, breaking a roll of bread with hands that looked startlingly rough against the fine china. His knuckles were thick, scarred in faint white cobwebs. That sounds heavy, he said. Not impressive, just heavy. It's necessary, she snapped, checking her phone. A text from her CFO. Crisis averted. She exhaled, allowing herself a sip of the Sancerre. And what about you? The agency described you as a consultant. She said the word with the same enthusiasm one might use for tax auditor. That's the broad term, yeah, Mark said. Risk management and safety consulting. Independent contractor. So you advise companies on, what? OSHA compliance? Wet floor signs? Sometimes, Mark said, unbothered by her tone. I help people navigate unstable environments. I assess structural integrity, evacuation protocols, crisis response. It pays the bills. Elena felt a headache blooming behind her eyes. She had specifically requested a power player, someone who understood the kill or be killed rhythm of her life. She imagined Mark walking around a warehouse with a clipboard checking fire extinguishers. And it gives you flexibility, she recalled from his bio. That was your main requirement. Right, flexibility is key. For what? Golf? Mark set the bread down. He looked at her, and for a second, the air around the table seemed to cool. For my daughter, Lily, she's 7, Elena blinked. The child. She's not the child, Elena. She's my daughter. Her mom passed away 4 years ago. So, the flexibility is for school pickups, ballet recitals, and making sure she doesn't eat cereal for dinner every night. I work contracts so I can be there when she wakes up and there when she goes to sleep. Elena leaned back, crossing her arms. This was it, the final nail. It wasn't just that he was a widower that was tragic, sure, but it was the surrender of it all. He had taken a tragedy and used it as an excuse to tap out of the race. That's, quaint, Elena said, the word dripping with condescension. But don't you miss it? Miss what? The fire. The ambition. She gestured around the room, encompassing the city beyond the walls. Look, Mark, I'm sure you're a great father. But I need a partner who understands that the world doesn't stop for ballet recitals. I've been up since 4 a.m. negotiating with a supplier in Seoul. I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. I don't build my life around convenience. I build it around legacy. She picked up her fork, stabbing a scallop as if it were a competitor. I can't be with someone who's content with average. Mark watched her eat. He didn't look offended. He looked almost pitying, which infuriated her more than anger would have. You think average is the absence of a title? He asked quietly. I think average is settling for safety, she countered. You check fire extinguishers, Mark. I put out fires that burn through billions of dollars. We operate on different frequencies. I'm high stakes. Your maintenance. Mark took a sip of water, his gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the wind was picking up, whipping the awnings of the building across the street. You know, he said, his voice low and steady, I used to have a job with plenty of pressure, Elena, real pressure. Not money pressure. Elena let out a short, incredulous laugh. Oh, did you manage a particularly chaotic Home Depot? He looked at her then, really looked at her. It felt like being scanned by an X-ray machine. I found that peace is harder to come by than adrenaline. Anyone can jump off a cliff, Elena. It takes a lot more strength to stand still at the bottom and catch someone. Cryptic, she scoffed. And evasive, she signaled the waiter. The gesture was sharp, imperious. Check, please. We haven't finished, Mark noted. I have, Elena said, pulling a platinum card from her clutch. She dropped it on the table with a metallic clatter. Dinner is on me. Consider it a consultation fee. Buy Lily a tutu or whatever she needs. Mark looked at the card, then up at her face. He didn't reach for it. He didn't argue. He simply wiped his mouth with the napkin and folded it neatly, placing it beside his plate. You're driving to Aspen tonight, aren't you? He asked. For that leadership retreat you mentioned? I am. I have a midnight check-in at the lodge. Don't go tonight, Mark said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. Elena paused, half standing. Excuse me? The barometric pressure has been dropping for the last 3 hours. The wind outside has shifted from the west to the north. I can smell the ozone. There's a storm coming in over the Rockies that isn't on your weather app yet. It's going to be a whiteout, Elena laughed, grabbing her coat. I have a Range Rover with 4-wheel drive, and I have a schedule to keep. I don't make decisions based on the smell of ozone, Mark. I rely on data. Data lags, Mark said softly. Instinct is real time. Goodbye, Mark. She turned on her heel. The heels of her Louboutins clicking rhythmically against the floor, a ticking clock of her own making. She felt a rush of adrenaline, the thrill of the exit, the satisfaction of cutting loose dead weight. She had wasted an hour, but she had reasserted her dominance. She was Elena Vance. She didn't need a safety consultant. She needed the mountain. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, the wind hit her. It was colder than she expected, biting through her blazer. A few snowflakes, hard and granular like salt, stung her cheek. She glanced back through the window of the restaurant. Mark was still sitting there. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at the menu. He was looking at the back of her head. He picked up his phone, not to check a stock price, but to check a tracker. He watched a blue dot begin to move on the map. Elena climbed into her car, cranked the heat, and pulled out onto the avenue. She felt powerful. She felt unstoppable. She had absolutely no idea that the man she had just left holding the check was the only person on earth capable of surviving where she was going. She merged onto the highway, accelerating toward the mountains, driving straight into the mouth of a monster she was too arrogant to see. The billable hours were over. The survival hours had just begun. The irony of the Aspen Leadership Retreat was that the introductory pamphlet glossy, heavy stock printed with soy-based ink emphasized the concept of radical self-reliance. Elena Vance had listened to the audiobook version on the drive up, nodding along as a calm British voice explained that true leaders forge their own paths through the wilderness. She was currently forging a path through a blizzard in a customized Range Rover autobiography, a vehicle that cost more than the average American home. Inside, the cabin was a hermetically sealed capsule of luxury. The heated leather massage seats were kneading her lumbar spine. The ambient lighting was set to a soothing violet hue, and the climate control was locked at a balmy 72 degrees. Outside, the world was ending. Mark had been right. The thought arrived unbidden, irritating her like a hangnail. The storm hadn't just arrived, it had detonated. What started as a few granular flakes in the city had evolved into a white curtain of heavy, wet snow that swallowed the headlights' beams before they could reach the asphalt. "Siri, how much further to the lodge?" Elena asked, her grip tightening on the heated steering wheel. "I'm having trouble connecting to the network," the digital assistant replied, her voice maddeningly cheerful. Elena cursed, glancing at the center console. No service. The signal bars had vanished 10 miles ago. Right around the time the road narrowed into a serpentine twisting through the darker recesses of the Rockies. "Fine," she muttered. "I'll do it myself." She leaned forward, squinting. The windshield wipers were thrashing at maximum speed, fighting a losing battle against the ice accumulation. The wind buffeted the heavy SUV, shoving it sideways with invisible hands. She checked her speed, 35 mph, cautious, responsible. She rounded a blind curve near the Devil's Punch Bowl. It wasn't a mistake of skill, it was a mistake of physics. The temperature had plummeted so rapidly that the wet road had flash frozen into a sheet of black ice. Invisible beneath the fresh powder, the back tires lost traction. For a heartbeat, the car floated. It was a serene, weightless sensation that defied the violence to come. Elena corrected, the wheel steered into the skid, just like the defensive driving course had taught her, but the momentum of 3 tons of steel was unforgiving. The Range Rover pirouetted. The headlights swept across the trees like searchlights in a prison break. Then the world tilted. The front bumper clipped the guardrail. The metal shrieked, a high-pitched scream of tearing steel, and then gave way. Gravity took over. The car went over the edge. The first impact was the loudest. The nose of the SUV smashed into a granite outcropping, shattering the windshield and deploying the airbags with the force of a shotgun blast. The cabin filled with white powder and the acrid smell of chemical explosives. Then came the roll, crunch, darkness, scream, crunch, darkness. The car tumbled down the steep embankment, tearing through pine trees as if they were matchsticks. Glass exploded inward, metal buckled. The roof collapsed. Elena was tossed around the cabin like a ragdoll, held in place only by the seatbelt that was now bruising her chest with crushing force. The violence lasted for 12 seconds. It felt like 12 years. The vehicle came to a rest on its side, wedged between 2 ancient fir trees at the bottom of a ravine, nearly 300 feet below the road. Then, silence. The kind of silence that is heavy, pressing against the ears. The only sound was the hiss of the ruptured radiator and the wind howling far above, indifferent to the wreckage below. Elena blinked. Her vision was a kaleidoscope of gray spots. She tried to inhale, but the air was freezing, biting her lungs. The luxury capsule was gone. The windshield was gone. The passenger door was concave, crushed inward. "Status," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Report?" Her brain, wired for corporate crisis management, tried to run a diagnostic, head throbbing. Warm liquid running into her left eye. Arms, bruised but moving, legs. She tried to move her left leg. A scream ripped from her throat, raw and animalistic. It wasn't a sound a CEO made. It was the sound a wounded prey animal made. She looked down. In the dim flicker of the dying dashboard lights, she saw it. The crushed door frame had buckled inward, and a jagged shard of aluminum had pierced her thigh, pinning her to the seat. The blood was dark, almost black in the low light, and it was pulsing, arterial. The word floated up from a biology class she hadn't thought about in 2 decades. Femoral artery, high pressure, rapid exsanguination. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. She fumbled for her phone. It was gone, thrown from the cradle during the tumble. She looked around the shattered cabin. The floor mat was covered in snow and glass. "Help!" she screamed, but the wind snatched the word away immediately. She was alone. She was 300 feet down a ravine in a blizzard, miles from cell service, bleeding out. The cold began to set in immediately. The adrenaline that had initially masked the pain was fading, replaced by a shivering that rattled her teeth. She watched her breath plume in the air, shorter and shorter puffs. 10 minutes passed, then 20. She tried to stop the bleeding with her hands, pressing down on the wound, but her fingers were numb, clumsy blocks of ice. The blood was warm, sticky, and relentless. She started to think about the merger. The papers on her desk, the unread emails. They seemed like artifacts from a different civilization. Did I send the term sheet? It didn't matter. Did I turn off the oven? It didn't matter. She closed her eyes. The darkness was inviting. It promised to take away the pain in her leg and the biting cold in her fingers. "Don't go to sleep," a voice in her head whispered. It sounded like her father, or maybe it was the man from the restaurant. Data lags, instinct is real time. "Mark," she whispered. She had been so rude to him. She had treated him like a waiter who had brought the wrong order. A light. Elena's eyes snapped open. She thought it was the tunnel, the proverbial light at the end of the life. But it was too bright, too focused. It was cutting through the swirling snow from high above, a distinct piercing beam sweeping the ravine floor. "Here!" she croaked. "I'm here!" The beam stopped. It locked onto the wreckage. Then she saw the silhouette. A figure was descending the sheer, icy face of the cliff. They weren't slipping or scrambling. They were rappelling. The movement was fluid, controlled, terrifyingly fast. The figure kicked off the rock face, swung out, and dropped 20 feet in a single bound, the rope humming. He landed on the slope 20 yards above her, detached the line, and began to slide down the scree, moving with a purpose that terrified her. The figure reached the shattered remains of the windshield. A gloved hand gripped the crumpled roof frame. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The voice was muffled by a heavy balaclava, but it was authoritative. It wasn't a question. It was a command for a response. "Help me," Elena wept. "My leg." "I'm stuck." The man didn't waste a second. He pulled a heavy crowbar from a pack on his back. With a grunt of exertion, he jammed it into the gap of the crushed door and heaved. The metal groaned, screeching in protest. It didn't open fully, but it moved enough for him to slither inside the wreck. The cabin was small, claustrophobic, and smelled of copper and gasoline. The man clicked on a headlamp, blinding her for a second. He ignored her face. His eyes went straight to the blood soaking her trousers. "Okay, I see it." He stripped off his heavy outer gloves, revealing blue nitrile surgical gloves underneath. He reached into a pouch on his chest rig and pulled out a black nylon strap. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. He leaned in close. His eyes were the only thing she could see, gray, calm, devoid of panic. "You have a femoral bleed. I need to apply a tourniquet. This is going to hurt more than the crash. It is going to feel like your leg is being crushed. Do not pull away. Do not fight me, please," she whimpered. "Just get me out. I'm getting you out. But first, I have to keep the blood inside you." He moved with a speed that blurred. He slid the tourniquet high up her thigh, near the groin, well above the injury. He yanked the strap tight, Velcro ripping. Then he grabbed the windlass, the plastic rod, and began to twist. 1 turn, pressure, 2 turns, agony, 3 turns. Elena screamed. It was a sound that tore at her vocal cords, a white-hot spike of pain that eclipsed the cold, the crash, everything. She thrashed, her hands clawing at his jacket. "I know," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a soothing, rhythmic chant. "I know. Breathe. Breathe through it. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. Done." He locked the windlass in place. The flow of blood stopped. Elena slumped back against the seat, gasping, tears freezing on her cheeks. The pain in her leg was a throbbing, dull fire, but the sharp, draining sensation was gone. The man grabbed a thermal blanket from his pack silver and gold foil and draped it over her, tucking it tight around her neck. He checked her pulse at the carotid artery, his fingers pressing firmly against her neck. Pulse is thready. "Rate is 120, he muttered to himself. He reached up and pulled off his balaclava to get a better look at her pupils. Elena focused on him, her vision clearing slightly. The stubble, the square jaw, the small scar on his chin that she had stared at yesterday while mocking his ambition. "Mark?" The word hung in the frozen air. Mark looked at her. There was no recognition in his eyes at first, only assessment. He was looking at a patient, a set of vitals, a problem to be solved. Then the realization clicked. He blinked, and the professional mask softened just a fraction. "Elena," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. "Well, you certainly know how to make an exit. You followed me?" She slurred, shock competing with hypothermia. "I saw the weather," Mark said, turning his attention back to her leg, packing the wound with gauze. "I knew this road. I knew your tires." The math didn't add up. "You're a consultant," she whispered, her mind unable to reconcile the man who ate chicken parm with the man currently saving her life. Mark paused. He looked at the wreckage around them, the precarious angle of the car, the blizzard howling outside, the blood on his hands. He let out a short, dry chuckle. "Yeah, I consult on high-risk environments." He keyed a radio mic clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Sierra 1 Actual. I have located the Vic. Mile marker 42, approximately 100 meters down the ravine. One pox, female, mid-30s, femoral bleed, controlled with TQ, suspected internal injuries. Conscious but shocky. I need a high-angle rescue team and a bird on standby." "ETA, Sierra 1 Actual." The call sign sounded military, precise, a voice crackled back, distorted by static. "Copy, Sierra 1. Heavy rescue is 30 mics out. Weather is grounding the bird. Nearest LZ is the highway. 30 minutes, Mark hissed. He looked at Elena. "Okay, we have a wait." He reached into his pack and pulled out a saline bag. He unzipped his jacket and tucked the bag against his chest, right against his base layer, warming the fluid with his own body heat. "You're a dad?" Elena said, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might crack. "You pick up." "From ballet." "I do," Mark said. He took her hand, his grip crushing and warm. "And before that, I was a paraskiman, USAF. My job was to jump into places where people were having the worst day of their lives and make it better." He began to set up the four-line. His hands were steady as rock, despite the sub-zero temperatures. He found a vein in her arm on the first try of feet that hospital nurses often missed in warm rooms. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, watching the saline drip start. "You didn't ask who I was," Mark said gently. "You asked what I did for a living." "I told you, I keep people safe," the car groaned. The wind shifted and the wreck slid 6 inches down the slope. Elena shrieked, gripping his arm. "It's okay," Mark said, though his eyes darted to the tree holding them up. It was splintering. "We're secure enough, but we need to keep you awake." "Elena, look at me." She looked at him. His face was inches from hers, filling her world. "You said you thrive on pressure," he said, his voice demanding her attention. "Prove it. Talk to me. Tell me about the IPO." "What?" The IPO, Aura Bio. Why is it worth $1 billion? Pitch me." "Right now, I can't think." "Yes, you can. Your brain is shutting down because of the cold." "Fight it. Sell me the stock, Elena. Why should I buy?" "Synthetic platelets," she gasped. "Shelf stable for 2 years. No refrigeration needed." "Good," Mark said, checking the tourniquet again. "That's actually useful, especially out here. What else?" "Universal donor, compatibility, no, rejection risk." "See?" "You're brilliant," Mark smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen since he ripped the door open. "Keep going. What's the ticker symbol?" AURA. "And what are you going to do with the money? Buy a boat in Manhattan?" "A big boat." "Okay, a big boat. Lily wants a pony." I tried to tell her the zoning laws in our apartment complex are strict, but she's persistent. You think I should get her a pony?" Bad investment," Elena mumbled, her eyes drooping, high overhead. "Depreciating asset." Mark tapped her cheek, sharp and stinging. "Stay with me, CEO. No sleeping on the job." For 30 minutes he kept her on the edge of consciousness. He used every trick in the book. He made her angry. He made her laugh. He asked her complex math questions. He monitored her vitals, adjusting her position, shielding her body from the wind with his own. He wasn't just a rescuer. He was a human life support system. When the lights of the fire department finally appeared on the ridge above, it looked like an alien invasion. Ropes dropped down. Men in heavy gear descended. But Mark didn't step back. He took charge. "She's packaged," he told the lead firefighter. "4 is running. TQ time is 2,145. His spine is cleared, but let's be careful. We lift on 3. They strapped her into the basket stretcher. As they prepared to winch her up, Elena felt a surge of terrifying separation anxiety. She reached out a gloved hand, grabbing Mark's sleeve. "You're coming?" she pleaded. Mark clipped his carabiner to the line next to the basket. "I'm not going anywhere, Elena. I ride up with the package." "That's the rule." The ascent was a blur of wind and snow. Mark hung suspended beside her, using his body to shield her face from the debris kicking off the cliffside. He murmured to her the whole way up, a constant stream of reassurance in the void. When they crested the rail, the chaos of the highway took over. Flashing lights, shouting voices, the thumping rotor of a helicopter that had managed to land in a windbreak down the road. Mark unclipped. He helped load the stretcher onto the gurney. He jogged alongside her as they pushed her toward the waiting flight crew. "BP 80 over 50. Mark shouted over the roar of the rotors to the flight nurse. "1 liter saline in. She's stable but fragile. Watch the hypothermia." The nurse looked at Mark, seeing the gear, the stance, the competence. She nodded, accepting the transfer of command without question. They loaded Elena into the belly of the helicopter. The warmth of the cabin hit her instantly. As the doors began to slide shut, Elena saw Mark standing on the asphalt. He was covered in snow, grease, and her blood. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline finally dumping from his system. He wasn't the power player she had wanted. He was something ancient and essential. He was the wall that held back the dark. She tried to yell, "Thank you," but her voice failed. He saw her mouth move. He raised a hand in a small, tired wave. "Drive safe," he mouthed, a callback to the restaurant. The helicopter lifted off, banking hard away from the mountain. Elena watched him shrink until he was just a speck on the white road, a single point of stability in a world of chaos. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, she didn't think about the market. She didn't think about the valuation. She thought about the man in the cardigan who had just saved her life, and how she had been too poor in spirit to afford him. The first thing Elena Vance noticed was the silence. For the last 10 years of her life, her existence had been a cacophony of ringtones. Conference calls, the clatter of keyboards, and the hum of server farms. Now, there was only the rhythmic, synthetic beep of a cardiac monitor and the soft whoosh of an oxygen regulator. She opened her eyes. The room was white. Aggressively, blindingly white. She tried to sit up, but her body refused the command. A heavy, dull weight anchored her lower half to the bed. Memory rushed back in a fractured, violent montage. Headlights, spinning trees, the crunch of metal. The cold Mark, she turned her head. There was no one in the chair beside the bed. Just a vase of obscene, expensive orchids standing on the knitstand. The card attached bore the logo of Arabio. It was a generic get-well arrangement, the kind her assistant ordered automatically for investors who had fallen ill. The irony that she had essentially sent flowers to herself was not lost on her. The door opened, and a doctor in a pristine white coat stepped in, looking at a tablet. "Ah, Miss Vance, you're back with us." "My leg," she croaked. Her throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. "You have a comminuted fracture of the femur and significant soft tissue damage," the doctor said, his tone clinically detached. "You also lost about 3 pints of blood. If that tourniquet hadn't been applied exactly when it was, and with the pressure it was, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would have bled out before the helicopter even warmed up its rotors." Elena stared at the ceiling tiles. "The man who brought me in, where is he?" "The search and rescue volunteer?" The doctor scrolled on his tablet. He gave a full report to the trauma team, signed the transfer papers, and left. He didn't leave a contact number. He just listed his agency affiliation. He left. Of course he left. He was a professional. He had done the job, secured the asset, and moved on to the next contract. just like she would have done, so why did it feel like abandonment? The next 3 days were a blur of pain management and corporate intrusion. Her phone, which had been recovered from the wreck, shattered but functioning, wouldn't stop buzzing. Her CFO wanted to know if they should delay the IPO roadshow. Her PR team wanted a statement about her harrowing survival. Forbes wanted an exclusive interview about how her indomitable spirit helped her survive the mountain. Elena had her assistant turn the phone off. She lay in the bed staring at the view of the Denver skyline. She was alive, she was rich, and she had never been more acutely aware of how few people actually cared about her. They cared about the CEO, they cared about the equity. If she had died in that ravine, the grief would have been measured in a dip in the stock price, followed by a swift recovery as the board appointed a successor. On the evening of the third day, the snow began to fall again outside the window. It was gentle this time, not the violent whiteout of the crash, but it made her heart hammer against her ribs. The door creaked open. Elena didn't look. "I don't want to sign any more papers, Sarah. Tell the board I'm sleeping." "I don't have any papers," a deep voice said. "And I definitely don't answer to your board." Elena's head snapped around. Mark was standing in the doorway. He looked different. The tactical gear, the helmet, and the command presence were gone. In their place stood the man from the restaurant. He was wearing faded jeans, a gray flannel shirt that had seen better days, and holding a brown paper bag. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was favoring his left knee slightly. "You came back," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was in the neighborhood," Mark said, walking into the room. He didn't hover by the door. He pulled the uncomfortable vinyl chair right up to her bedside, invading her personal space in a way that felt surprisingly grounding. "Actually, I wasn't. I live 40 miles away. But I figured the hospital food was probably terrible." He opened the paper bag and pulled out a small, slightly crushed box. The smell of grease and fried chicken filled the sterile room. "Chicken fingers," he announced, setting the box on the tray table. "From a place Lily swears by. Not exactly Le Bernardin, but I figured you could use some comfort food." Elena looked at the greasy box, then up at his face. The arrogance she had worn like armor at the restaurant was gone, stripped away by the cold and the fear. She felt exposed. "I was awful to you," she said. It wasn't the speech she had planned. It was just the truth. Mark shrugged, opening a container of dipping sauce. "You were stressed, and you were projecting." "It happens." "No," Elena insisted, pushing herself up slightly, wincing as her leg throbbed. "I wasn't just stressed. I was cruel. I called you maintenance. I told you that you didn't understand high stakes, and then you saved my life." She looked at his hands, the hands she had mocked for being rough. "The doctor said I would have died without the tourniquet." "You might have," Mark admitted quietly. "It was a bad bleed, Elena. Why did you come down there?" she asked, searching his eyes. "You knew who I was. You knew I had treated you like dirt. You could have waited for the fire department. You risked your life rappelling down a cliff in a blizzard for a woman who laughed at your job." Mark sat back, rubbing his jaw. He looked out the window at the falling snow. "Because that's the job," he said simply. "When the call comes in, it doesn't matter if the person is a saint or a sinner. It doesn't matter if they're a CEO or a kid who got lost hiking. The mountain doesn't care, so neither do I. You were in trouble. I had the skills. That's the end of the equation." "That's not human," Elena murmured. "That's mechanical." Mark turned back to her, and for the first time she saw a crack in his stoicism, a flash of old pain. "It's not mechanical," he said softly. "It's penance." Elena paused. "Penance for what?" Mark hesitated. He picked up a French fry, turning it over in his fingers. "I told you I used to be a PJ, pararescue, that others may live. That's the motto. I spent 12 years deploying to the worst places on Earth, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa. I saved a lot of people, pilots, soldiers, civilians." He took a breath. "But while I was over there saving strangers, my wife was here, fighting breast cancer. She didn't tell me how bad it was because she didn't want to distract me. She wanted me to focus on the mission. By the time I got back for good, she was in hospice. I missed the fight. I saved everyone else, but I wasn't there to save her." The room went silent, save for the hum of the heater. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She had accused him of lacking ambition, of fleeing the high-pressure life. She had been so spectacularly wrong. "I quit the service the day she died," Mark continued, his voice steady but low. "I took the consulting gig because it meant I never had to deploy again. I could wake up every morning and make Lily breakfast. But I joined the local search and rescue because, I don't know, maybe I'm still trying to balance the ledger. Maybe I just need to know that I can still bring people home." Elena reached out. Her hand, usually manicured and steady, was trembling. She placed it over his. His skin was warm, calloused, and solid. "You brought me home," she said. Mark looked down at their hands. He didn't pull away. "You're not home yet, Elena. You've got a long recovery. That leg is going to be a beast to rehab." "I'm not talking about the leg," she said. "I'm talking about this." She gestured vaguely at the room, at him, at herself. "I've spent 20 years climbing a ladder, Mark. I thought the view from the top was the only thing that mattered, but when that car went over the edge, I didn't think about my stock options. I didn't think about the merger. What did you think about?" "I thought about how cold it was," she whispered, tears finally spilling over, "and how alone I was." "Until you showed up," Mark squeezed her hand gently. "Well, you're not alone right now. Eat a chicken finger." "They're getting cold." 2 weeks later, Elena was discharged. She didn't go back to her penthouse in Tribeca. She couldn't handle the stairs, and frankly, she couldn't handle the emptiness. She rented a serviced apartment in Denver near the rehab center. She took a leave of absence from Orobayo. The board panicked. The stock dipped. She didn't care. For the first time in her life, she let the emails pile up. Mark visited twice a week. At first, it was under the guise of checking on her recovery. He was, after all, a safety consultant, and he took great pleasure in pointing out the trip hazards in her rental apartment. But soon, the visits became the highlight of her existence. He didn't treat her like a fragile invalid, and he didn't treat her like a CEO. He treated her like a friend who needed a reality check. "You're walking wrong," he said one Tuesday, watching her struggle with her crutches across the living room. "I am walking," Elena grunted, sweating with exertion. "That's the point. No, you're favoring the hip. You're trying to muscle through it. You have to trust the hardware." He walked over, gently correcting her posture, his hands on her shoulders. "Slow down, it's not a race. You don't have to win rehab, Elena." "I have to win everything," she muttered, but she slowed down. "Not this," he said. "This you just have to survive." Then came the Saturday that changed everything. "I have a scheduling conflict," Mark said on the phone. "I can't come by to check the smoke detectors or whatever excuse I was going to use today." Elena felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Oh, okay, work?" "No, Lily, her babysitter canceled. I have to take her to the science museum." "Unless," he trailed off, "unless what?" "Unless you want to come. It's wheelchair accessible." "And Lily has been asking about the lady from the mountain." Elena froze. Children were not her demographic. Children were sticky, irrational, and poor conversationalists. But the thought of sitting alone in her apartment watching Bloomberg TV suddenly seemed unbearable. I can do a museum," she said. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science was a chaos of screaming children and echoing hallways. Elena, seated in a sleek motorized wheelchair, felt conspicuously out of place in her cashmere sweater. Then she saw them. Mark was standing by the T-Rex exhibit, holding the hand of a small girl with messy pigtails and bright pink glasses. The girl was bouncing on the balls of her feet, vibrating with energy. Mark spotted Elena and waved. He leaned down and whispered something to the girl. The girl marched straight up to Elena's wheelchair. She stopped, put her hands on her hips, and stared at Elena's bandaged leg. "Daddy says you fell down a mountain," Lily said. Her voice was loud and factual. Elena blinked. Yes, I suppose I did. Did you break your bones?" "Yes, my femur," Lily nodded solemnly. "I broke my arm once, falling off the monkey bars. I got a purple cast." "Did you get a purple cast?" "No," Elena said, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "They gave me a metal rod inside my leg." Lily's eyes went wide. "Like Wolverine?" Elena laughed. It was a genuine sound, rusty from disuse. "Yes, exactly like Wolverine." Lily turned to Mark, who was watching them with a guarded, hopeful expression. She's cool, Dad. She's a superhero, Mark grinned, the expression transforming his face. I told you she was tough, Lil. The rest of the afternoon was a revelation. Elena Vance, who usually negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, found herself debating the aerodynamics of pterodactyls with a 7-year-old. She watched Mark in his element, not as a rescuer, but as a father. She saw the patience, the gentle humor, the way his entire body language softened when he looked at his daughter. She realized that this chaotic, sticky, loud afternoon was the average life she had mocked. And looking at it now, from the vantage point of her wheelchair, it looked richer than anything she had ever built. They ended up at the cafeteria. Mark bought them ice cream. So, Elena said, dipping a plastic spoon into a cup of chocolate. This is the schedule you protect so fiercely. It is, Mark said, wiping a smudge of vanilla off Lily's nose. It's not for everyone. It's not high finance. No, Elena said softly. It's harder, and it's better. She looked at Mark. I owe you an apology for something else. You've apologized enough, Elena. No, I need to say this. I told you that you settled. That you gave up? But you didn't? You just realized what the prize was before I did? She reached out and touched his arm. I want to learn, Mark. I don't want to just be the lady who fell down the mountain. I want to be someone who knows when to stop climbing. Mark looked at her, and the intensity of the moment was broken by Lily. Are you guys gonna kiss? Lily asked, her mouth full of ice cream. Because in the movies, when the grown-ups look at each other like that, they usually kiss. Mark turned bright red. Elena felt a flush rise in her own cheeks, something that hadn't happened since business school. Eat your ice cream, monster, Mark said, ruffling her hair. But he didn't move his arm away from Elena's touch. 6 months later. Elena Vance walked into Le Bernardin. She was using a cane, a sleek, ebony thing with a silver handle, but she was walking. She approached the corner table. The Mater D hurried over. Miss Vance, your usual table? Actually, no, Elena said. I'm meeting someone, but we're not staying. She saw him waiting by the bar, Mark. He was wearing a suit. This time it fit better than the last one, though he still looked like he'd rather be in a flannel. You look dangerous, Mark said, nodding at the cane. It's a tactical accessory, she replied, smiling. I'm told it's good for balance. And for hitting people who bore me. Am I boring you? Not yet. She took his arm. Come on, I canceled the reservation. Mark looked confused. You did? Why? I thought you wanted to redeem the disaster date. I do, Elena said, leading him toward the door. But I realized that sitting in a stiff room, eating tiny portions of food, and talking about market caps isn't really US. It isn't me anymore. So where are we going? They stepped out into the Manhattan evening. The air was crisp, hinting at autumn. Elena looked up at the sky. No storm clouds tonight. Just the steady glow of the city. I found a place, she said. It has terrible lighting. It's incredibly loud, and the menu is mostly fried. Mark raised an eyebrow. Sounds risky. I have a safety consultant, she said, squeezing his arm. I like my odds. And Lily? She's meeting us there with the nanny. She claims she needs to evaluate the structural integrity of their onion rings. Mark laughed, a warm, resonant sound that made the passers-by glance over. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and saw not the CEO who measured life in 6-minute billable increments, but the woman who had survived the fall and climbed back up the other side. Lead the way, boss, Mark said. Elena Vance, CEO of Orabio, hailed a cab. She didn't check her phone. She didn't check the time. She just slid into the back seat next to the man who had saved her life, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt completely, wonderfully safe.